It's time to revisit our legacy piece tier list for DC Dark Legion. This is the October 2025 edition of the tier list. You'll notice that we've made quite a few changes to the layout of the tier list. So I'm going to break that down for you a little bit before we jump in and talk about a few of the things here. The first thing I will mention is despite the fact that there are a lot of changes to kind of where some of the legacy pieces land, there were so many changes, I think, that it didn't make sense to do up arrows and down arrows and that sort of thing. You can definitely go back and compare to the prior tier list if you care to see that level of detail on it. But I'll try to kind of explain to you my reasoning for this change. I did mention in one of the prior videos that I was trying to think of a different way to kind of case the recommendations that I'm providing for you. It is quite daunting to kind of look at this list and say, like, okay, well, what should I be focusing on? So you'll notice that in addition to the basic tiers, the S, A, B, C, and D, I've included basically like a header for like what it means to be in that tier. Now, that doesn't encompass every single piece in the tier. Sometimes there's not like a perfect fit. But what I've tried to do is case it as you have your meta legacy pieces, which are legacy pieces that if you own that champion, you 100% need that legacy piece. And also having that legacy piece on the champion, it makes their kit work really, really well. And that champion is most likely an S tier champion anyway. So it just makes a lot of sense for you to kind of marry those two together. Now, A tier legacy weapons are just kind of the solid options. Like they're ones that if you don't have the unique legacy piece, these are going to provide you a lot of mileage to get you where you need to go. They're going to do largely the same thing. You're just not going to get those extra skills that you would get with the unique legacy weapons. And they're also not going to cost you a lot of magic eyes. So solid options that they're going to be staples on your account. Even if you are a whale, you're going to be using these A tier legacy weapons. Now, B tier on this list is going to be a little bit different from the way that you would think about B tier for the regular champion tier list. So bear with me here. I'm calling B tier on this tier list the niche picks. So these are going to be legacy pieces that are high level if you have them, but you have to really, really think about whether you want to buy them in the first place. Through all of the ones that require magic eyes, the unique legacy weapons in S tier and A tier, you're just not going to be able to afford all those in the first place. So then if you're looking at one of these legacy weapons that's down in B tier, you really have to ask yourself, like, is this a champion that you are just obsessed with them from the comics or something and you just have to build them? Or is it a champion that you need to have for whatever team you're trying to build? And then maybe you can justify that. So we'll come back to the niche picks when we talk through all of the legacy weapons in a moment. The last two tiers are a little bit easier to explain. So the C tier is going to be for early game. These are going to be predominantly those legendary level legacy pieces that you're going to be getting them from the bleed. You're going to be getting them from the Monitor's Legacy Pass, and several other ways that you can acquire these legacy pieces now. But they're just going to be kind of staples for that first month or two that you're playing the game before you've been able to pull in the bleed a significant amount of times and start acquiring some of those mythic level legacy pieces that are higher up. The C tier designation for these legendary legacy weapons, I would say you shouldn't think of that as like these are trash legacy weapons. It's just that they're pretty solid, but there are better options out there for you as the game progresses. So that's the reason why I've named these C tier early game legacy pieces. And then we have D tier, which is for new players. These are legacy weapons that if you compare them against everything else that's on the board, they're really just not worth using after a certain amount of time passes. Like once you're able to get Purple Ray Radiation or one of the other healing legacy pieces, you'll never use the Pied Piper Flute again. So, things like that where you will be using a lot of these legacy pieces early on in the game. And especially if you're a non spender, you're probably going to have some of these equipped on the champions that are in your 3v3 squads because you may just not have anything else that's available. So again, D tier doesn't necessarily mean really bad. It just means these are kind of like the bottom of the barrel, but they're the ones that you will have access to uh, early on, and the ones that you're going to be getting to 5 red a lot faster. So jumping back up to the top to the S tier or meta tier legacy weapons, you'll notice that most of these weapons are going to be unique legacy weapons, and they do correlate, as I mentioned, to champions that are in S tier. We've got Constantine, Nightwing, Sinestro, all three of their legacy weapons for the damage dealer portion of the tier list. And you'll notice that T-Sphere is there as well. This is one that is getting used a lot in Legion of Doom comps. So people are equipping it to Lex. They're also equipping it to Deathstroke over the katanas. So the katanas are a pretty decent option. Again, I have them listed as a solid option here, but you can avoid spending those magic eyes by just equipping the T-Sphere over to Deathstroke. Now, obviously, T-Sphere is also really useful for Nightwing before you get his Eskrima sticks. And so just, again, because of the utility of that piece and what it does, it just makes a lot of sense for it to be up in the meta tier along with all the other unique legacy weapons. Moving over to the Guardian and Warrior section, we've got Superman's cape, we've got Queen Hippolyta's staff, and then we've got the House of El symbol for Supergirl. Those go without saying. Obviously, if you're building Superman, you pretty much have to have his cape. If you're building Queen Hippolyta and you're a high level spender, you have to have the staff in order to combat Legion of Doom at the highest level. But it's also incredibly helpful at lower levels as well if you're, going for a team that would do well with Queen Hippolyta. Supergirl's legacy weapon makes a lot of sense on her if you have invested in her. Talked about how expensive she already is because you have to build pretty much the entire Superman family team for her to work well. But if you're going to be going all out that way anyway and pushing for her, then you kind of want to spend those magic eyes on her here as well. We've got Starfire's Starbolts, which again is just one of the best, it's one of the legacy weapons in the game that has the most utility because of what it can do. You can put it on any support and they kind of become a pseudo healer for your team. Helps out with Bat Family, helps out with Arkham's Most Wanted, Legion of Doom, several other teams that can heavily benefit from having the Starfire Starbolts equipped. And then we've got the Super Six String, which I've mentioned in other videos is incredibly helpful for throwing on a support, not just Superboy, but any support where you can provide a massive amount of additional attack to your team. So another one that is incredibly useful, even if you don't have the champion that it's typically attributed to. So definitely worth investing. And then we have Green Lantern's legacy piece. Won't spend much time on it. You know how I feel about Green Lantern, incredibly expensive champion. But this one does have a really nice shield. If you are going for Green Lantern and you're a heavy spender, and you have him built past purple stars, then you definitely want to have this equipped to him. I'm not going to go through all of the A tier, the solid options that you have available, but I'll just mention that you're going to see a few legacy pieces in this tier that do require magic eyes. There's some of the unique legacy weapons that didn't quite make it into the meta tier. We talked about the katanas a little bit. You've got Scarecrow's legacy weapon and Joker's legacy weapon here. If you're building an Arkham's Most Wanted team, you're most likely going to want to invest in those. I think they're really solid legacy weapons, but Scarecrow can get away with using the Gabriel horn or several other options that are out there. If you're running him in PvP, you're probably going to be using Harley's hammer on him actually. So just kind of you need to think ahead and think about what you're trying to build before you invest in some of these solid option unique legacy weapons. Joker's scepter was actually recently buffed, and so I moved it up out of B tier, out of the niche picks, because I really think if you're going to be running Joker at all and you invest heavily in him, you need to have the scepter. And the higher you can get that scepter, the better over time. So moved that one up. Robot Duplicate, Purple Ray Radiation, Starheart Staff, incredible support level legacy pieces. You got Amazonian Shield, which is really, really good, not just on Wonder Woman, but you see a lot of use on other champions as well because it provides a little shield for you. Tectonic Disruptor, Imp Doll. These are all really, really good legacy weapons, and a lot of them you're going to be getting a decent amount of stars on over time just from pulling them out of the bleed. And then we also have a new way to acquire these, which is if you purchase the Monitor's Legacy Pass on a monthly basis, you're also going to be getting a couple of pulls of, I think there's a handful, like 5 of the legacy weapons, and they kind of give you a few to choose from. So you got the T-Sphere, you got the Amazonian Shield, you got Purple Ray Radiation, and there's a couple of other ones that you can choose from there. So they kind of give you the option to choose between whether you want a DPS, support, or tank legacy weapon there, and I really like that. For the niche picks, we've got the 2 new League of Assassins, the Al Ghul's champions that have their unique legacy weapons, and those there's no reason for you to purchase those unless you really want to be building a League of Assassins lineup. And I think for most players, you probably don't want to be building that team unless you are a heavy spender. So I would say probably avoid those unless you just have a very specific use case for them, like maybe a League of Assassins counter team in PvP. I did include Zatanna's staff over here in the niche picks as well. If you're running a very heavy Justice League Dark team, especially if you're planning on going for Swamp Thing down the road too, the Wand of the Magi is actually a pretty good legacy weapon for Zatanna. I think you can get away with equipping some of the other options to her, like Starheart Staff. So, it's not a, heavy requirement that you go after this one. It's probably one of the lower tier legacy weapons out there just because it doesn't have like a massive impact. There are a couple of things that are helpful about it. I think there's that piece that allows you to escape an incapacitation effect once per battle. So, not completely useless, but definitely just kind of an edge case legacy weapon in that regard. In the Guardian and Warrior section here, you can see there's a pretty high concentration of legacy weapons. We got a few here that, again, they're just ones that you're probably not going to be using a ton because you have better options available, but they do have use cases like Duplication Mirror, really good legacy weapon for like Shazam, for example. You've got the Prometheum Claws, which a lot of people will use those on Superman when they first start out playing the game, and then transfer those over to Batman if you obtain Batman. There's a couple of others that they're worth using on, but it's a weapon that you need that champion to be able to do a lot of damage to use them. Again, it's a non-unique legacy weapon, so not a ton of investment required there. So it's not going to hurt you to have that in your roster. It's not like you're having to spend magic eyes on it. The rest of these do require magic eyes, and they're definitely for very specific builds that you're trying to do. So we have the Karoo pendant here. You'll notice this is one that I had up in S tier previously, but I really think that it's one of those, again, you can't think about like S to B being like a super bad thing. It's really just an acknowledgement that you don't want to own the Karoo pendant unless you're building Martian Manhunter, and you really need to be committed to building Martian Manhunter for whatever reason you're building, in which right now the only reason would be if you needed like a high level Justice League Dark counter in PvP. But I don't really think that Martian Manhunter is like super meta right now, especially not in the soft launch servers where we have some better options that can kind of keep your team alive. We've seen a little bit of testing with Swamp Thing to show that even a Martian Manhunter with a high level crew pendant uh, might not be able to slice through that team with all the damage reduction that Swamp Thing is able to do. So again, just a very niche legacy weapon there. We've got Harley's Hammer. I mentioned Scarecrow as a use case for that one. There are a couple of other champions that can do well with it. You could use it on your Supergirl or Superman if you were trying to go with you're trying to like increase your crit rate. And it's easy to recommend this one actually for some of those builds because you get it for free now. So I probably should put a caveat on that you're going to be getting the Harley Hammer for free, but it definitely still is kind of a niche pick for like what you would want to use it for. And you want to be careful not to invest into that legacy weapon just because you got it first. I would definitely, hold your magic eyes to try to spend on a second one if you're a non-spender. And then we've got making its debut in this tier list, the antlers for Swamp Thing. I definitely think it's a really, really good legacy piece. 100% worth investing in if you're going to use Swamp Thing. But contrary to some of the other unique legacy weapons out there, this isn't really one of those that you would buy so that you could use it on champions other than Swamp Thing. I really do think it's one that's kind of made for Swamp Thing, especially because of the fact that it can do so much to reduce attack and crit rate. It's a really, really powerful legacy weapon. If you take a look at what the Green Knight, the first skill, the one that's required that you have to have Swamp Thing for it to work, at 5 white stars, the Nature's Curse, the debuff that gets inflicted on enemies, is going to go from reducing attack by 30% and crit rate by 15% to reducing attack by 50% and crit rate by 25%. So it's going to be a ridiculous nerf or debuff to the enemy team. And in my opinion, this is a very niche weapon for probably either PvP or very specific PvE battles that you're going to be doing. But definitely something that's going to probably shut down Legion of Doom going up against Justice League Dark. At least in the beginning of the battle, it's going to. So definitely a niche pick, but one that is really powerful if you have the right team comp. And then the last one here, the Thanagarian Mace, which really I'm thinking about moving it into like a tier of its own, or like putting a little box down in the bottom right corner of the graphic, because it's really one that I would say like you should not build. No one should be spending magic eyes on Thanagarian Mace. I did put it in niche picks because if you just can't help yourself but to want to build Hawk Girl for some unknown reason, then you might want to build the Thanagarian Mace. But honestly, there's better weapons out there. They nerfed it right after they introduced it, so it's even worse now because it just does basically 0 damage. But, again, put it in the niche picks for that reason. Well, that's going to do it for this legacy piece tier list roundup. Hope you enjoyed this new version. Let me know down in the comments below if I did a really good job of moving the tiers around, or if there's anything that maybe you would do different, or if there are any that you disagree on. This is definitely not going to be the final form of what this is going to look like. If you have any advice or thoughts on maybe ways that we can adjust this tier list to make it a little bit better for the next time, I'm all ears. Let me know in the comments. Let me know on the Discord. We can take the discussion over there. I'm happy to do that. But really appreciate you tuning in. If you haven't already done so, consider subscribing to the channel or becoming a member. I put out 3 to 5 videos on DC Dark Legion every week. If not, I will hopefully see you on the next video anyway.